were completed. Yes. No other commission. No, I think. So, Mr. Bostinaru, would you?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dear petitioners and dear colleagues, this is one of those painful days to remember, which shows the limits of our union, of our project, and the abusive behavior of one of another member state of authorities or authorities which have to be not only limited but have to be addressed. I knew from the very beginning, from my early involvement in the political life, that Copenhagen criteria was meant to measure the functioning of the democratic institutions of a candidate country. But I never, absolutely never imagined that one day Copenhagen could be associated with such a dramatic violation, I would say, of fundamental rights. It's just incredible. I love Denmark. I always shown great degree of appreciation for the functioning of democratic institutions in the country. But when listening to the Commission mostly and to the dramatic testimonies provided by the petitioners, there are some issues which have to call your attention, Commission. One, where is the equal treatment of the parents in front of a court? It's about the fundamental right of EU citizens to be equally treated in front of a court. But what we've been told by the petitioners, that there is a clear discrimination based on the citizenship, based on ethnicity, based on the fact that EU citizens, when married in Denmark, are differently treated by court and authorities. It's against the EU laws. In my poor Romania, if the authorities will dare to treat someone in that way, I will be the first to ask the country to be punished, because it's just unacceptable. Then, it's about the processual right of an EU citizen, the fair and equal treatment of the two sides. But we are told repeatedly, if not obsessively by the petitioners, that in front of the court, one side is also treated in a privileged manner, and the other side is always depossessed by his fundamental rights. And this is again unacceptable. It's not about Russia or other countries, but an EU member state. Then, it's about the decision taken by the police to retain the passport of an EU citizen, which clearly means the violation of the fundamental right of free movement, even in non-EU member states. A decision to retain the passport, which means to limit the fundamental right to stay, to reside in one or another member states, requires a court ruling. Here is just a decision taken by the police. The police never judge. The police never ruled. How to accept that? Only because it's the Danish police? No, it's unacceptable. Then, it's a clear, brutal interference of public authorities into the family, private life. It's about parents and children. In Sparta, the draconian rules were deciding what child is good and what child is not good. If it's suffering, if has some disabilities, that child was meant to death. Could we accept that a public authority, no matter where in our Europe, could decide what is good and what is wrong, finally, for a family life, for a fundamental parent's life, in such a one-sided way? No, it's just shocking. And sorry, I'm so sad, and I feel so much pain when listening to those incredible stories. Then, can an authority, no matter where, depossess a parent for his fundamental right, at least to get access to his or her child, to visit his or her child? Can be such a person sent to jail 1 day, 17 days, 6 months, no matters, just for trying to get access to his or her child? It's this Nazi regime which was deciding how to deal with our private family, our sexual life, our kids, our everything else. Could we accept that in such an innocent way? Sorry for the very tough sentences, but I am a parent myself. I have a nephew myself. I had a little girl, she died by leukemia. I know what means how to dare to decide finally on the most sensitive issue, the right of a parent. It's just shocking. Sorry. No, please apologize me for this highly emotional final comment, but no, this cannot continue in the same way. Simply cannot continue in the same way. This is not business as usual, and we are not discussing about goods, commercial rights, intellectual property rights. It's about fundamental rights, and at least to set up common standards, the children and the parents within our union to be treated. It's the prerequisite. It's nice to go to the European citizens today in the electoral campaign to tell how beautiful, how nice, how incredible it's the European project. But what to tell to the petitioners? What to tell to the other parents in our Europe? We've been told about the UK cases. What is our message, European Commission, to those human beings? Do we have any answer? Could we accept to remain silent or to be blind when this happens in front of our eyes? Because our neutrality is equal to complicity. And I will close right now. I will end my speech. Once again, sorry. But when speaking about children's rights, nobody can be ice, can be Iron Man. It's about the most precious human feelings, and even the animals are treating their yes, with I was ready to say human feelings. We cannot accept to be cold-minded when discussing about children's rights, and to accept that this process to continue. And I was attempting to say we can invite the petitioners to go to the European Court of Human Rights. I know they can do that. But how long a children will be condemned to stay without his father or his mother, without his or her parent, before a ruling in Strasbourg will be the final, and then the member state will be obliged to pay attention to the ruling of the court? How we can measure the sufferances? Okay, sorry.
Thank you very much, but we do not have more than 25 minutes for the rest to speak. So, Mr. Iturgais, would you?
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you very much. I'm going to try and be as brief as possible. When we went to Denmark, we went to this on a fact-finding mission, what we saw was something very unusual. Unusual, as Mr. Boștinaru was saying, it was very difficult. Of course, after having heard my colleague and friend Victor Boștinaru speak and mention some of the things he has faced, it's very difficult to take the floor now. What we're seeing today, Victor, well, it's just really it's just a small amount of what we saw in Denmark when we went there and when we heard those mothers and the father who told us about their situation and what's going on in this part of the European Union. And that's the tragedy. That's the tragedy. This is happening in the European Union. We're not talking, it's not some far outlandish country somewhere far away. No, it's somewhere on our very shores. So we've heard stories from mothers who have been put in prison, mothers who have been institutionalized for many reasons. And let's not forget about the children themselves, children who have gone through very difficult times and who have suffered from a great deal of psychological stress. And so what we see here is a violation of human rights, of conventions, and this is a European government that's allowing all of this. So once again, after having heard the statements today, if we go into the details, and when we hear the Commission's representative saying, yes, we sympathise, but there's always a but. There's a but, yes, but, and this is the issue here. How can we hear the mothers and listen to their tragic stories, but just take them in? And show them around and get the media around, but then what happens next? They go back to Denmark and that's that. I mean, we can't just leave things at that, just in this room, in this committee. We have to take this to the plenary. We need to ensure that all our colleagues hear about this, that they're aware of this. This is a scandal that this is happening in Europe. I don't know what we'll have to do to get this message out there, but this is one of the most important things, one of the most important missions for this committee. Just full stop.
Very good suggestion, Mr. Iturgais. Now, Mr. Boulin.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would also like to show my support for the petitioners we've just heard, who outlined the situation they're currently going through. From all the topics we've been dealing with here in our committee, these are the areas that are the most striking, the most dramatic, and that carry the most significance. And this is from a rather modest point of view, because when we look at the different areas, there are different areas where we can act more swiftly than in these areas. 2013, European Year of the Citizens. If there are no citizens, there's no society without citizens, and there's no society without the family nucleus, and that's really the base of our life. Is this a European issue? Well, these petitions were admissible, and so one of the sine qua non conditions for these petitions to be admissible is for them to be in the sphere of competence of the European Union. It's a European subject. It's not just about subsidiarity, even if subsidiarity, of course, has to be respected. It's not about attacking a nation at all. Sometimes there might be different issues. For example, yes, Denmark can go into a European restaurant and say and order from the general menu, but order some things outside of it as well. Now we've seen this in a German case and we've also seen a number of requests for petition on similar sort of cases, and now we've seen the case in the case of Denmark. These petitioners are not alone. Of course, each individual case is complicated, but we need to ensure that we are able to find a solution and look at this into greater detail within our committee. We need to put a bit more effort into this and a bit more imagination. Of course, this is only the tip of the iceberg. Not all European citizens are aware of the fact they can petition. I can imagine that there will be a great deal of people who don't know that they can petition. We have had an experience. We have a body of experience in Germany on separations and custody, and we haven't really made any progress over the last 3 years in this area. There have been proposals, there have been visits to Germany in that case, and there's been the visit to Denmark. On the custody issues, on the pressure faced from administrative officials, and what happens in other cases when time passes and the children reach the age of majority. The procedures differ from a case to case, and sometimes there's a lack of response, and the European arrest warrant is sometimes used in an abusive manner. When we look at these different issues, and when we've looked at the previous cases concerning Germany and what we've heard today, the European Commission takes a step back rather and looks when it looks at these cases. It looks rather at the subsidiarity and European member state legislations, but we need to remind ourselves that in a great deal of cases, that the legislation applicable, if there are two citizens from two different member states, what do you do if you have a decision in one member state compared to a decision taken in another member state, depending on the parent's nationality? Which subsidiarity prevails there? So these are very difficult issues to deal with. The Court of Justice, the courts, the German courts, their work is consistent in general, but there's sometimes things that do escape them. What about the possibility of appeal for the citizens concerned? And then Rome 3. It's proposed to parents who want to get married. They have the choice of which legislature will apply should they divorce. But how do people get to find out about this? How can this message get out? If you get local authorities in Denmark, in Germany, how do they make this known that people do have this option? How does this get applied on the ground? In the German cases I made, I think I've got about a minute left. Germany and Italy, there's no national ombudsman. And so I think that for a European citizen to have the right of appeal to an ombudsman would be the most neutral way to go about things. That would also be respectful of the national legislation of the country. If the appeals procedure was geared in that way. So having heard these petitioners, it was interesting to see that there was a link with that ombudsman, but to say that the ombudsman had refused to take their particular case on board, which I think is rather scandalous. I believe that perhaps a possible way forward would be to have the network of European mediators to be established in each member state. We would have the mediators who would try and go about resolving the problem. I think that's perhaps a way, and a soft way, perhaps a way forward in order to ensure that European citizens have access to help. And finally, I think that as MEPs, we are in a position to do that. We should contact the media. I think that each and every member state, at least I know it's the case in my country, could also come alongside with us and aid us in our plea when we look at the responsibilities we have for our citizens.
I know it's a very, very, very sad and very important thing, but please, we do not have that much time. So, Mr. Jahr, start being shorter.
Auken next.
No, Mrs. Auken. Sorry.
Ja, jeg vil tale dansk, da jeg af hensyn til...
I would like to speak Danish because I don't want the Danish public to misunderstand this, and I want to make sure. I agree what Mr. Boulin said, but mediator and ombudsman is not the same thing. A mediator is a little bit different from a Danish ombudsman. They're all heart-wrenching, all of these cases. I take it it's not the first time that I and my colleagues have heard such terrible, heart-wrenching stories. I am a pastor, and I have the experience that often you can hear the other side of the matter, and it's often just the same. It's not always the mediator who does this. We can use other ways of making people understand each other. It's not like one side has all the right. And it's just not only at the European level, but what is so heartbreaking, so unfair, is that they don't have a chance. They didn't have a chance, but they pretended that it would help. It wouldn't, not 1 millimeter. They thought perhaps that if they presented this to the Committee on Petitions, it would help. I regret, I deplore this. It doesn't move a thing. And nothing will happen because of this. We know lots of cases also in Jugendamt, as you said, in all countries. And I'm sure that the authorities have also made mistakes. And, well, then you have to identify these transgressions or mistakes and use the opportunities you have. What I advocate is that the Danish legal opt-out is removed so that we can also be included in this cooperation also on civil law matters. I hope it happens. Other member states have refused to enter into a parallel agreement on custody, parental rights, etc. We wanted to do away with this legal opt-out. So once again, yes, I'm also in tears. I know that it is heartbreaking. However, I have often heard the other side of the matter also, and often both sides are crying just as much. Maybe you don't think that they don't have the right, but I hear mothers cry, I hear fathers crying. Is there a trend? Is there a tendency? Is there something we could apply? You say that you disregard the rights of the child and give too many rights to the parents. However, In these cases, the authorities have done absolutely nothing to make sure that there was contact with both parents. So that's the opposite case. Well, I know that there was a willingness to present this to the committee, and that was not quite appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Auken. Well, I would suggest foreigners not to be married to Danish people until the legislation in the country is going to change. But Mr. Jahr.
Ja, vielen Dank, und ich wäre...
Thank you very much. I'll be brief in keeping with your request because Iturgais and Verdman want to speak as well, and Mr. Bostinaro gave us a very good introduction to the topic. Of course, we should have maybe also have an exchange of views with the petitioners. We've already had meetings on this with interpreters there up to midnight, and I mean, the discussion we had at the time, we couldn't stop, but it was a very heavy night. It was a difficult night. We heard very emotional stories, and of course, you tend to become involved. Back to Denmark. I love Denmark. I love going there on holiday, and I find very open people there. But things can't continue as they are. Something's going wrong in Denmark. Let me start with the positive. I think it's important for the Commission to say, well, we're going to issue guidelines. We're going to have something in the case of divorces about custody and visitation rights. They say, well, we don't know about the legal basis elsewhere, but of course we want EU citizenship. And part of EU citizenship is that people love each other, get married, have children. But of course, sometimes you also need to give some thought to what is to happen if people divorce, and visitation rights and divorce and so on. The Commission says, well, that's all done and dusted. And anyway, it's subsidiarity that applies. But of course, in Denmark, you have the issue of the opt-out. What I've jotted down here is opt-out cannot lead to discrimination against EU citizens. I understand that Denmark has its own rules, but an opt-out can't lead to discrimination. And I have a question for the Commission. It's something that keeps popping into my mind. With this opt-out, you have the impression, at least my impression is that Denmark is using this opt-out to, well, we had a fact-finding mission. It was difficult to have people to talk to us. They weren't really that willing to cooperate. So they pulled up a wall and said, well, what do you want? I mean, we can do as we see fit in our own country. And anyway, you have the opt-out, but you also have international law. Denmark accepts international law, but not EU law. How about that? That's a bit of an odd situation. It's probably easier for a Canadian to pick a fight with the Danes than it is for an Austrian to do that with Denmark. And I don't really understand that situation. Now, you say that international law must prevail and must apply, but then EU law between member states doesn't. It's the same with orders that are handed down. Apparently that can be switched around in Denmark. You can place a ban or a travel ban on parents. If they do leave Denmark, they lose their visitation rights. I mean, that can't be the case. So basically, what is our message to the petitioners? What I've jotted down is that we don't want to give up. We shouldn't give up as a petitions committee. If things are not right, then we need to make sure that we keep at it until things are in order. Now, of course, there's the European Court of Justice. I suppose that's an option. But we do need to make sure that we communicate on this to the outside world. That's a political weapon that we have to raise this issue. That's certainly what we'll do. And, of course, we'll have to continue discussing it here. And the Commission is invited to look at this issue of an opt-out. Can an opt-out lead to clear cases of discrimination against EU citizens? In my view, it can't, and it shouldn't. I mean, you can't use an opt-out as a justification for everything. You know, they keep saying opt-out, opt-out, opt-out. What do you want? What are you expecting from us? But again, an opt-out is not a non-freedom. It can't lead to discrimination of EU citizens. And then just the last point is on children's rights, and of course we shouldn't lose sight of those either.
Ευχαριστώ κύριε Γιάρη. Η κυρία Ζτάνουκα, παρακαλώ.
Chair, I'll be really very short. Just to continue, with all sympathies to petitioners, I want to reflect to what to do, how to overcome this reply on subsidiarity, and I completely agree to Mr. Yars that we don't need to give up. But using the presence of the Commission, what I wanted to add, I think Commission is very often giving up. Because when the petition is coming here, and you are our intermediator between the Petitions Committee, other members, and the government of the state. And what we see in all these dossiers, that the Commission is asking the government, then the government gives very formal answer, no, yeah, we are doing well, no problem, and you are satisfied with this. And then you don't insist to have a proper answer, to have from the government a proper answer on concrete cases of concrete violations which are mentioned in the petitions. Because normally the answer of the government is very, very simple, without any reflection to the concrete abuses, concrete accusations. And that's what I think, using your presence, we have to ask from you to be insistent and to tell the government that such a body as the Petitions Committee of the European Union exists, and we want to respect. We want from them the respect, because what I see, they do not even want to take care that the European Parliament and European institutions exist, and they want to involve into domestic matter. It's not a domestic matter, it's Charter of Fundamental Rights, and my request to the Commission to be insistent and to ask proper answers from the government. It will help in these cases. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Becker. Mr. Becker, you asked to...
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Dear petitioners, I'm going to try and be brief here. What we've got on the table in front of us, when we look at these dramatic and emotional, but also political situation that we're confronted with, we have a question from the legislative perspective, a question of subsidiarity, and the question of the opt-out. And here we're lying at the threshold between these three issues. All that we can deduce from that is that all of the suggestions that are made that are about political pressure and about media pressure, that all of them ought to ensure that the first consequence is that, and by the way, and this is something I'm saying to the Commission and the Council, that actually this issue comes to the plenary debate. That's what has to happen. So I can expect that the Commission here and the Council will show some political and legal creativity in order to get us out of this cul-de-sac. We cannot be satisfied with the conditions and situation that we have at the moment. When we're talking about children's rights, we absolutely have got to the end of our tolerance. It's now zero tolerance for what happens. We have to and now expect that immediately, as soon as possible, this question of the changing of the opt-out status now becomes a priority for us, and we are expecting that the Commission and the Council will come back to us, and they don't just come back with the same old responses and the same old story. Thank you very much. Honourable Wertmann.
The Commission. I appreciate your answer. Unfortunately, I regret it very much that you do not give us any answer that would shed some light to the hope of the petitioners, men and women, and their children. Do you really think that the opt-out is the key answer here? Do you really think that? Do you really think we are so naive that we do not know that there are international conventions, just as, for example, the Hague Convention, Madam Chair? I know of one case or two cases where the Hague Convention has not been applied and the opt-out has actually put above the Hague Convention. Is that not European, or is that European? One big question for you, ladies and gentlemen. I have to say to my colleagues who think that we should force the Commission into a closer cooperation, I have to inform you, colleagues, that I have been in close contact with representatives of the Commission, in very close contact concerning several petitioners. Unfortunately, it was always the answer, here we can go until this point, but we cannot go any further because of the opt-out. I question very much whether the opt-out actually gives us the possibility to say no to the European Charter of Fundamental Rights, to say no to human rights, to say no to children's rights, to say no to any other European rights. We talk here, Madam Chair and colleagues and dear petitioners, about a European state, about a state which is actually part of the European Union. Yes, there is the opt-out, okay. But does this give the right to the state, to this particular state, to say no to the European laws and legislation, to say no to these mentioned European rights? Is this really the case, that we can accept such a state within the European Union? We are all surprised, politically speaking. We are all surprised that we have tendencies to the very right, tendencies to the very left. Margaret, you're laughing. I have observed your enjoyment here. But the problem is, if we cannot keep the rights in place, if we cannot keep and care for the petitioners and for our youngest citizens, do we really think that we keep the European Union together? Politically speaking, yes. We heard it today. One lady said she felt like Jews in World War II. The other one mentioned the Nazi regime. Another one. We heard these comments. Can we really allow this as politicians to have the rights of petitioners, of our citizens? And yes, even third country citizens are our citizens. They are living in the European Union. Can we allow these rights to be treated like whatever? Just like throw them in the dustbin. They cannot be heard. They cannot be given their child. Children, talking about children, no, not come on. Children have the right to be with their mother. The mother is the person who gives birth to the child. So I question here whether these women and fathers, in some cases, are being treated as just a person, or whether Denmark treats animals better than men and women. That's a big question, I think. The other point I want to point out is several things. We have problems with authorities in this case, because if you think of the documentation, we have issues with, especially in one or two cases present here today, where documents have been wrongly issued. There is one lady who can prove that she has the original document, and a few months, weeks, even years later, another document was issued in favor of the counterpart, in her case, of her ex-partner. In some cases, we have that there is the right to access of documentation, that this right is being denied. Is this really part of the opt-out, or is this part of our European rights? Or even evidence simply disappears in one case. I had once a phone call, a lady talking to me, a petitioner talking to me, saying, Madame Wertmann, what can I do? I have to call you, I have to inform you that documents simply disappeared. There is no proof anymore, there is no evidence anymore. Can we really allow this, dear Commission? And we have to ask all our member states whether they think that this is good. Whether this is European, I don't know. I have my doubts about this. Another point I want to raise, and I have to raise, is that our children actually become prisoners. We have heard it today. We have heard it as the delegation in Denmark. The children cannot leave the country anymore. Yes, there is a mother who wants to go on vacation with her child. We heard it today for just 2 days. In the other case, for 3 weeks. And was simply denied this right to go on vacation with her children. She has to stay within Denmark. Do we really deprive our children of going abroad, of seeing something else? We have this problem already. So do we want this? Is this what we want for our children? And then the ombudsman has been mentioned. Dear delegation members, dear colleagues, we have been to the ombudsman office. The ombudsman informed us of what his office can actually do. We heard it today, what the ombudsman said to one of the petitioners. Do we really think that this is the right person to talk to if we have problems like this? And then allow me one comment, because a lot has been said and I don't want to repeat it, but we have to here clearly state that this is a systematic problem in Denmark. Yes, we have some problems in other countries too, of course. But here we have a systematic problem. This is just the peak of the iceberg. And I really mean it this way. It's just the peak of the iceberg. I have knowledge of several hundred cases. If I put my knowledge together with a few other people who have knowledge about several hundred cases, then we have about more than 1,000 cases. Is this normal? Is this European? Is this okay for a member state of the European Union? To come back to the political issue. Petitioners, I congratulate them all to their courage to speak to us, to bring this to the public, because I think it is very important that we, the European Union, are actually indeed informed about what is going on in such a high esteemed member state of the European Union. I have my doubts whether this appreciation can continue like that. Yes, I appreciate a guideline commission. I appreciate that. But what will it lead us to? We have to think about that too. There will probably very soon be no more binational couples anymore. Why? As I heard it a few days ago in my own country, I'm not going to marry another person than an Austrian because I don't want to run into these difficulties as I read on the website of the parliament. Yeah, I understand the reaction of the young person. I fully understand it. I think we have to think about these things, what consequences it actually has. And yes, finally, we all agree that we have to bring it into plenary. I suggested that already 2 years ago. And everyone said, nah, this is just a single case. This is just an individual problem. We can see here that these problems are tragic, and these problems are by no means individual cases or single cases. And with this in mind, and with all the details that we have, and allow me one other thing. Dear Commission, there was one statement that was completely misrepresenting a case. It is the Weilharter case. You misrepresented her case in a complete different way. She was not the abductor. I have to mention this, dear Chair, because this statement, I read it and I read the correction that was sent out by our Chair Mazzoni. It has to say, if the Commission misunderstands the documents that is provided by the Parliament, that we get as the Parliament, we get them from the petitioners, real documents, real documentation, not just an opinion. I think this has to be questioned too. And finally, and by no means last but by no means least, allow me to say and to alert everyone that the members of the European Parliament can only talk on the basis of what has been provided to them and what they had been able to do on research. This is also very important because there are some people who question our credibility and our work. And we are by no means a court, but we are obliged by the duties of our work here, by the duties of a member of the Petitions Committee, that we support the petitioners in their view and to find a result and to hopefully give them back their children and give these mothers and fathers back their children. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. It has been a shocking morning. I must say, and we have to admit. Would you, Mr. Bustinari, before?
Just trying to put a bit aside while it's so difficult,
the
the very hard feelings. I will come up with a concrete proposal. First, one, oral question with debate and resolution. Number one. Number two, a letter to be passed to the Commission to start working on a document about addressing the problem at the European level. Because the name of a country is important, but not that important when it happens in other member states too. So we have to solve the problem, to ask the European Commission to finally come up with a legal binding solution to prevent in the future such tragedies which are faced with serenity by some.
Mr. Bustinaro, I was going to say things like that because you've already suggested it. This is the role of the chairwoman. So I would like to conclude. Am I right or not? Yes. All right, thank you so much. Now, so this has been a really shocking day. It reminded me of Shakespeare, who says that something is wrong in the kingdom of Denmark. Yes, in this case, something is wrong. No, I've not completed. So, this is not only a political issue, not a social issue, it's an ideological issue. And I'm really shocked that it happens. It comes from a country to the north of the European Union. I think it affects very strongly the European idea, finally. So, I wonder what the Danish colleagues in the Danish Parliament are doing to face or change this situation. But this is something I cannot say, I do not know. I would ask Mrs. Auken to make an attempt to inform them there in Denmark. So, what we are going to do, we can write another letter to the Danish authorities in the hope that they would answer this time more. We shouldn't, you think? David said we should. Of course, the Commissioner has to be informed immediately, quite urgently, on the context of these petitions and all the rest that maybe they've come before here. And of course, I'm thinking of this, accept the possibility of a question to the European Parliament and the discussion into it. But this will be decided in the meeting of the coordinators, so I'm open. No,
just one
the case is closed.
I must inform you that the Danish government has answered several times from the representation here. You're not satisfied with the answer, I know that. But you should, it's not true. It's absolutely true.
Take it and use it. All right. We don't. It's a pity we have to close this way, but many thanks to the petitioners, many thanks to the colleagues. Let's hope that the Commission will come up with some possibilities of your defending your cases, and the Parliament will be supportive. Next meetings. No.
The BI tends to keep open.
All right. The final issue was whether we keep or not some items open. These 45 and 47 will be kept open.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.